up in Zim, I would say that I am part of the privileged minority of Zimbabwe. I went to very good schools. Um, I obviously was able to come to a university in South Africa and not at home. Um, I think Zim was nice. I mean, it had a lot of hardships, to be honest with you, because I grew up in Zim during the hyperinflation time, you know. So in grade one, I needed just $1 or $2 at school. By grade seven, I would get something million pocket money. So it was a very confusing experience as a young kid. And also, it was a very, uh, how can I call it? A very, um, how do you, contrasting like situation, because I came from a privileged family, but there's a time getting bread, getting groceries, um, electricity, load shedding. People are talking about load shedding in South Africa now, but there's a time load shedding in Zim just became a way of life. Um, like similar to how people in Nigeria say that everyone just has a generator. You just know that you have a generator. Very few people are on the grid in Nigeria. In Zim was very similar. There's a time you'd have load shedding 3-4 days in a row. Um, but I also experienced, what I'd say the best of Zim. I went to a very good school. I never had any. I never had anything growing up that I would say I lacked. Uh, I always used to, when I came to varsity, I always compared that. Wow, if I had what I had in Zim, but in an environment like this, I probably would have been a totally different person. So I think the hardship part of it um, prepared me for like later on in life when things are hard. I did have everything, but that thing of growing up knowing that things are uncertain, things can change, I would have friends that I was in class with today, a parent passes away, they literally can no longer afford to be at the same school as me, they can't afford the same things. So it was a very eye-opening childhood, I'd say. Um, but yeah, um, the first time I saw a gun was in South Africa. Police don't even move around with guns. I think I saw a gun maybe like at a ooh, sorry. Okay, I saw a gun maybe like at a parade or something like that. But like I think one of my first experiences, you know, coming over and like literally staying in South Africa was the idea that cops just have guns there, and you'd hear about shootings. Um, so for me, Zim, I would say at the time, I don't know now because things. It's a different generation now, and things are really hard. Um, but at the time, I would have said Zim is probably one of the most peaceful countries I've experienced. Um, People very friendly, and I think also because there was that the 1980s brought that thing because it was similar to 1994. South Africa was, the place to go. 2010, South Africa was a place to go. There were opportunities. There was development happening. Um, so Zimbabwe, in its time as the breadbasket of Africa, also had a very diverse group of people. There were Mozambicans, there were Malawians, there were Congolese people that are now even into the fabric of what you would call Zimbabwe. They have, yeah. Uh, for me, that's a bit hard because I, I'm an activist at heart. Um, and it's hard for me to beautify Zimbabwe without bringing up the painful reality of why Zimbabwe is in the situation it is in today. Would you enjoy Zimbabwe? Yes, there's Victoria Falls, there's Great Zimbabwe, there's a tourist side to it. There's also a great, push for young people to, you know, become farmers, and there is a sort of ecosystem that's allowing that. But again, it's for a certain privileged few that have access to certain people and certain resources. Um, there's the 0 to 100 stories of people that do gold and diamond and they become rich immediately. So Zimbabwe I have a love-hate relationship with Robert Mugabe because, he did leave. It's like building a mansion. Then you say, kids, do whatever you want, right? So us, the kids within, we can maybe try to do what we want, but then the structures are not there. There's no piping, there's no windows. And we can say that, they say Zimbabwe's own land and we're free and all that. Yes, I guess, there's an element of having to suffer for that. Zimbabwe is one of the few places I know that a young person like you or me can literally get a gold claim and start mining gold. Whereas all these other places, because of Western hold, would have licenses and, the bureaucratic processes that make it impossible for anyone that's not of a certain race or ethnicity to tap into those things. So that's the nice part of Zimbabwe. It has allowed there is room for young people to tap in, but also there's the reality that we're a generation that's been left with nothing. The first thing I think I would do in Zimbabwe, and it's weird because I think Kagame of Uganda did something similar. Is to close down churches. You see, when black people are hungry and desperate, they we tend to hold on to anything that gives us a sense of hope. It makes no sense that churches are probably some of the richest institutions in Zimbabwe. Whereas if the church was really being able to get that money, build factories, let's create we are saying we are farming all this stuff, but to get cornflakes, we need to bring it to South Africa because that's where the machine is that makes cornflakes. So for me, there's that thing of, yes, it's nice to be spiritual and prayerful and all that, but I think um, a lot of what's happening in Zimbabwe in terms of churches is now very cultic. It's very cult-like, and people have lost the ability to reason and think for themselves. But also, people outside the political party, the only other place they can organize themselves is the church, and the churches don't have leaders that are willing to take the hard route to start creating certain solutions. So that would be, I think, the first thing I would do. I would really question what it is we're doing every Sunday as Zimbabweans, because there's a difference between salvation and desperation, and I think we're mixing up the two. The second thing is I would scrap the education system. I would keep the philosophy of hard work, but I would scrap a curriculum that literally is no longer competent in a globalized world. Zimbabwe was supposed to be similar to Denmark in Europe. Denmark has its own curriculum. I think it's Denmark. It's one of these European countries. Um, we can't be happy with 1980 textbooks and 1980 knowledge. And, you know, yes, we're getting A stars, but the Zimbabwean system, remember, Zimbabwean education was given to us by a colonial regime. And anything that colonizers were giving us with a intention and a strategy in mind. So Zimbabweans right now, as educated as they are waiting for someone to come and open a business because they can't think of organizing resources to create something, but they can write an amazing CV and apply for a job. They are amazing at applying for visas and looking for jobs somewhere else. But we have not been educated to control the means of production. And this is my thing with people that I was like, Zimbabwean education. Yes, Zimbabwean education is good because it teaches you discipline, you work hard, but it's slowly becoming irrelevant in a globalized world. Right now, if you are by grade 5, if you're not using a computer, what's going to happen in 20 years? I'm in tech right now. Everything we're doing is moving towards that. So we have people with certificates, especially now, everyone in Zimbabwe has got a degree. But what are they doing with the degrees? So that's my second thing. It would be a real look at the education system. The third thing I would do is probably push for a one-party state. I think let's just accept that we have dictators. Let's accept that elections don't matter. Let's accept that ZANU-PF owns the country. Let's accept that. Let's just leave them to do that, because the amount of resources we waste on elections, the amount of violence that happens during elections, and the amount of confusion and chaos that happens even in ministries. If I'm a minister and I know that, guys, I've got 2 years to chow, because every 2 years someone changes, do you think that ministry is ever going to produce anything? Because I'm just saying, okay, today is my chance to eat, so I'm going to squeeze it as much as I can. So let's have a one-party state. Let's stop this politics of playing the political game, because now the people are suffering and nothing is being done. In Zim we have the A-level system. So I finished my A-levels in 2010. And that's why people are always like, Zimbabweans are so clever, because A-levels are slightly almost like first year. And I do know O-levels, which are the ones you do at 16. If you get really good results, you can actually apply to university with O-levels. So O-levels are similar to matric in the sense that it's like 9 to 10 subjects, whereas A-levels, most people specialize on 3 subjects. So I did maths, physics, and chemistry for my A-levels. It's not something I really wanted to do. It was more pressure from my dad. I don't know what else I would have done, because I was never really given an opportunity to test out what other subjects I would have liked. But I definitely would have leaned maybe more towards I don't know what I would have leaned towards, but I think that's the important part of varsity, because varsity then, when I got to varsity in 2012, I had the opportunity to find out what is it that I really like doing. But anyway, so 2010, I finished my A levels. 2011, I took a gap year. Um, my gap year was probably the most important year of my life, because not only did it like slow down, okay, what do I want? Um, I worked as an assistant teacher at a primary school for about 6 months. Um, and it's one thing to live in your own bubble about what you want to do, but it's another thing interacting with young kids who think you have everything sorted out, um, who ask you questions. It was a very interesting experience for me, that 6 months. But during that year, I did my applications. Surprisingly, UCT is the only university I got into. I applied to like all of them, UKZN. I only got into UCT. So I came to UCT. First year was a great year.
Get into it.
First year was great. I think I was in my element. I'd come from a gap year. I'm ready for school now. I wasn't drinking that heavy at that time. I was gymming. I was having a very good, everything was balanced.
Can you recall like any stories, any moments, any first encounters?
Okay, the only big moment for me first year was at the end of first year, where I ran for Housecom and I was then elected as head student of Kopano for the next year. But yeah, first year was pretty, I'd go out with friends, whatever, but I wasn't out there.
For someone who doesn't know what Housecom is, can you just like touch a little bit on the elections and the questions that you got? Like the quirky elements of it, and just like this mockery of democracy.
Yes.
Just like
so
part of it.
Housecom is I stayed in a boys' res. I think it's about 350 to 400 male residents. And the residence I stayed in, Kopano, was more like the Rainbow Nation project at UCT. They were trying to bring together different people from different backgrounds, because their whole thing was about diversity and unity. So that was Kopano's story.
That's actually what the name means.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when I ran for Housecom, it was an interesting time because certain things would come up like, you're Zimbabwean. Some tribalist things would come up, some xenophobic things would come out, some racist things would come up. But I guess coming from the background I had come from, I had the right tools to eventually persuade majority of the house that I could lead them for the year. You're given a budget, so I think every student at the time, from their fees, 900 would be taken from that res fee and put in a budget which the house would use for events, parties, outreach projects, development, schoolwork, mental health. So that our job as the house committee was to create an environment that allows everyone to be free, to also be in a space that is conducive for learning and development. And we had the budget for that. So Housecom has different portfolios. Mine was the head student. In as much as being the head student, you organize these big parties and you have a great time. You also have to deal with issues of people being suicidal, You have to deal with boys res, if they rape claims and so forth. People report things. Um, so it was a lot for me, because at the same time I'm also a student, and I'm also going through my own issues. It's it I was studying computer science, and to be honest, it affected my studies to a great extent. Um, but it showed me, that experience showed me that I was studying the wrong thing. Um, it 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 exposed me to the reality that I was studying something, um, to make my parents proud, and maybe while doing that, neglecting a certain calling I have, in terms of community leadership, social, social work, but more development. But then I think I was able to merge the IT concept of it with that, but I don't think I would have been exposed to thinking that, social development and social leadership is my calling if I had never been in those experiences where, um, so yeah, it was a very enriching experience. I wouldn't say I was a leader of Roads Must Fall protests, but I was heavily involved, especially on, the resident side, advocating for students. You can't kick out a student just because, it's end of semester or something like that. You can't, so those were the type of things I was getting involved in. Um, Also, the extension of permits for foreign students, because now, because there were protests, we're starting late. Home Affairs says cutoff is 30 January or whatever. So I was very involved in terms of, you know, emotionally and just, mentally, with regards to, um, the protest years. Um, there were a lot of things that happened, from certain classmates or friends committing suicide, um, just the whole, you know, emotional conversation around why roads must fall and fees must fall were happening. Um, so it was a very hard time for me, but even within that, um, I had found out that what I was studying was not what I wanted to study. So I'd already started a business of mine, and when I started applying for funding and, like, building this concept, around entrepreneurial hubs, I convinced myself that I would drop out. And I literally have had less than a year to go. But for me, being on campus at that time was, I would feel dead every time I was on campus. I couldn't. I was depressed. I was anxious. Um, it was those things of stun grenades and whatever. Because we were the people that were there advocating for things. So there were casualties. There were things happening. People were targeted individually. Um, this people will say that, you're overthinking it, whatever. Why would they do that? But to keep power, the powers that be also need to do certain things. So I believe that, people always say, you guys are overthinking. I believe that there were spies during protests. I believe there's students being paid to do certain things. I do believe there was sabotaging. There was, I think I don't have real evidence of it, but I'm not naive to because I saw how it grew to how it crumbled.